Hi everyone. So this video is going to continue our series on Descartes' meditations by taking a look at Descartes' sixth meditation argument for dualism. So in this video, we're going to start by distinguishing the dualist and the physicalist view, then look at what Descartes has to say about our knowledge of the essence or nature of mind and body, and we'll go back to the cogito to talk about the essence of the mind, and back to the wax example to talk about the essence of body. Then we'll give his conceivability argument for dualism, and this is going to rely on a conceivability test of possibility and the conceivability of a disembodied mind. And the second claim here is going to utilize Descartes' evil genius again. And lastly, there's a mirror example from the previous videos I had you watch. So I want you to imagine that you're setting up a blind date between your best friend and another friend, A. Your best friend and A have never met, they've never seen each other. How would you describe your best friend to A, whoever they might be? So when you describe your best friend, you'll probably end up using some language that gives a physical description and some language that gives a mental description. So you might describe their hair color, their eye color, their height, their weight, etc. These are all physical descriptions. But you might also talk about maybe their beliefs. Maybe they are Christian or Muslim or atheist. Maybe that's important to your best friend. You might describe their desires or goals. So what do they want to be when they grow up? What career are they hoping to get into? Maybe their emotions, their personality. These are all mental descriptions rather than physical descriptions. So we use these two kinds of descriptions. But how are these mental and these physical things related to one another? Is a person's mind or are those mental features just a special kind of physical stuff? Or is a person's mind something more than their physical makeup? So physicalism is a family of theories that claims that everything is fundamentally physical. Now these views, they're not going to deny, usually, they're not going to deny the existence of the mind or mental things. They'll still admit that yes, people have experiences, emotions, beliefs, desires. But since everything is fundamentally physical, they say these mental things, the mind, needs to be understood as a purely physical phenomenon. So by appealing to that physical stuff that we can describe, we're able to understand the mind just using that stuff. A popular version of physicalism says that the mind isn't just any old physical stuff. It's a very special physical organ, namely your brain. So it's your brain while it's living and working properly. That's what a mind is on this mind-brain identity view. Dualism is a family of theories that holds that there exists physical stuff, such as bodies and their features, their physical sort of descriptions, but there's also an entirely non-physical or immaterial thing, such as minds and their features. So your beliefs, your desires, your memories, they cannot be understood purely as sort of the activity of the physical things going on in your brain with the neurons. In order to understand your beliefs, desires, and memories, they are something more than your brain or its activity. So on this view, the mind and the brain are two distinct entities, thus the dualism. The mind is also something different from the abstract programs or functions that physical things such as brains perform. Even if this is true, though, it still leaves open the possibility that the mind and brain interact with one another. Even if the mind and the brain are two different things, it's possible that the activity in the brain might affect the activity in the mind. And similarly, the activity in the mind might affect the activity in the brain. In the same way, look, my wife and I are two distinct persons. Nonetheless, the things that my wife does might affect the things that I do. And the things that I do might affect the things that my wife does. So even though we are two distinct substances, things, we can interact with one another. Similarly, the dualist, even if they think that the mind and the body are two distinct substances, they might say that the activity of each might affect and interact with the activity of the other. So one thing we need to do is we need to make sure that we are clear about our idea of the mind and our idea about the body before we try to decide how they're related. Descartes' meditations are partly an attempt to clear up what these ideas really mean. In order to understand this, we need a distinction we made earlier. There's these accidental properties. This is a property something has, but it could exist without that property. And there are essential properties. This is a property something has, and it could not exist without that property. The property is sort of definitive of that kind of thing. It captures the essence or nature, as Descartes talks about, of that thing. So example, my body has brown hair. That's an accidental property. My body could exist without brown hair. If I dye my hair purple, my body still exists. For an example of essential properties, having four sides is essential property of a square. It's part of the nature of a square. If something didn't have four sides, it couldn't be a square. And so Descartes thinks his discovery of the cogito helps us achieve a clear and distinct conception of the nature or essence of the mind. So not only do we learn that the mind exists, but since we know that the mind exists purely because we're aware of its thought, that allows us to learn that the essential or defining feature, the nature of the mind, is thinking, is thought, is awareness. So notice, this seems to get a lot of examples right. So beliefs involve thinking. When I believe that my daughter has curly hair, I'm thinking about my daughter. So Descartes' gloss on what defines the mind would correctly categorize beliefs as mental things, as parts of the mind. Similarly, desires involve thinking. When you desire to become a doctor over the next few years, you are thinking about doctors and you're thinking about the future. And so insofar as this desire involves thinking, Descartes' gloss again correctly categorizes desires as mental things, as parts of the mind. So that's at least some reason to think that Descartes has captured the essence of the mind correctly. So Descartes also thinks that his reflection on the wax example earlier helped us achieve a clear and distinct conception of the nature or essence of physical things. So in the second meditation, he didn't think that he knew yet whether physical things existed, but he thought that when he sort of analyzed his idea, his sort of knowledge of physical things, what he realized he knew best was the nature of those things, the essence of those things. And that essence, that nature or essence, he didn't get that knowledge of it from his senses. It wasn't a particular shape or particular color of the wax that sort of got to the essence of a physical thing. Rather, it was his reason that taught him that he has a clear and distinct conception of physical things as extended things. So the essential or defining feature of the body or physical things is extension, taking up space. Notice again that this seems to get a lot of examples right. A rock takes up space, and so on Descartes' conception, it's correctly categorized as a physical thing. My brain takes up space, and so it too is correctly categorized as a physical thing on Descartes' understanding. Now, Descartes thinks that we can take these clear and distinct perceptions of the essence of mind and body to prove that the mind and body are distinct in reality. So notice, we learn about the nature or essence of things by inspecting our ideas. But now he wants to prove not only are they distinct in our mind, but the mind and body are distinct sort of in reality. So here's his argument. From the fact that I know that I exist, and that at the same time I judge that obviously nothing else belongs to my nature or essence except that I am a thinking thing, I rightly conclude that my essence consists entirely in my being a thinking thing. And although perhaps I have a body that's very closely joined to me, nevertheless, because on the one hand I have a clear and distinct idea of myself, insofar as I am merely a thinking thing and not an extended thing, and because on the other hand I have a distinct idea of a body insofar as it is a merely extended thing and not a thinking thing, it is certain that I am really distinct from my body and can exist without it. All right, so let's try to unpack this argument. Descartes seems to be suggesting we can conceive of our mind existing without our body. So when we inspect our ideas, when we look at the sort of essence of the idea of a mind as a thinking thing, and we look at the essence of a body as a sort of extended thing, we can conceive of that one idea, a thinking thing, without conceiving of a body, an extended thing. But if we can conceive of something, then it's possible. And so it's possible for our mind to exist without our body. So since we're able to imagine or conceive of our mind existing without our body, it is thereby possible for the mind to exist without the body. But if the mind just was the same thing as the body, then it wouldn't be possible for the one to exist without the other. But since it is possible for the one to exist without the other, the mind is not the same thing as the body. They are two distinct substances or things. Let's consider this first premise. We can conceive of the mind existing without our body or brain, perhaps. So your ability to think about the evil genius possibility. When Descartes was imagining the cogito, he was imagining himself as existing with just ideas in his mind being zapped in there by an evil genius. But he imagined that the hands and body that he experienced, he was trying to imagine that those don't exist outside of his mind. So insofar as you were able to follow that as even a possibility, even if you didn't believe it was true, the fact that you were able to conceive of that situation is all that Descartes is pointing out with this first premise. Or when you think about the mirror example from the video that I assigned previously, you're being asked to imagine just this kind of situation. That you're having experiences, that you're thinking a lot of things, and then you have an experience in the mirror and you don't see your body. You look down, you don't see your body, you don't feel your body. You're trying to imagine your thought existing without your body. But then he says, look, the fact that we're able to conceive of this in our mind shows that it's actually possible for our mind to exist without our body. Well, why should we think that the fact that we can conceive of something shows that it's possible? Well, whether we ever experience something happening is clearly a bad test of whether it is or is not possible. So consider the following. 100-foot copy of Descartes' Meditations and a round square. Now, neither of those things has ever existed, and they probably never will. Nevertheless, I think I know that the first is something that's possible, and I think that the second is something that is not possible. How do I know? How do I have this knowledge about what is and is not possible? So I haven't seen a 100-foot copy of Descartes' Meditations, and I haven't seen a round square. But whether or not I ever experience either of those things, that doesn't tell me whether they are possible or not. So I know that the 100-foot copy of Descartes' Meditations is possible because I can conceive of it. Even if I've never seen one, even if I think nobody's ever going to build one, I can conceive of a 100-foot copy of the Meditations. And so I thereby know that even if it never happens, it's at least possible. However, when I try to imagine or conceive of a round square, I can't. I can't even conceive of that situation. I can't even make sense of that situation. And so I know that it's impossible. All right. So this is to suggest that the best test we have for deciding what is possible or impossible, not what's going to happen, but what is possible, is this test of conceivability. All right, now, what about this other premise that if mind is identical to body, then it's not possible for the mind to exist without our body? This is just a law of logic. If A equals B, if they're the very same thing, then A can't exist without B. So something can't exist without itself. It's pretty straightforward. And if your mind just is your brain or some other part of your body, whatever, then your mind could not exist without your brain. Because the mind is just another word, another idea for the very same object. And obviously that object can't exist without itself. The brain can't exist without itself. And so putting all those pieces together, that gives us Descartes' argument for dualism and the motivation he has for the various premises. In the next video, we're going to look at a famous problem known as the interaction problem that is very forcefully pressed by Princess Elizabeth. See you then.